I received a letter about my expulsion on the very day I was supposed to take my last exam before the holidays. I stood in the university hallway, phone in hand, reading the notice once, twice, 3 times. Unpaid semester. Debt. Expulsion in 2 weeks if I didn't pay. The amount was so high that my vision went dark. Where would I get that kind of money? I'm a student, 25 years old, living on a scholarship and part-time jobs. My parents can't help me. They're barely making ends meet themselves. I remember how my legs carried me to the exit. An exam? What exam when my whole life is falling apart? 5 years of study, sleepless nights poring over notes, all those hopes and plans, and all of it could just disappear in 14 days. I rode the subway as if in a fog. People around me were doing things, talking, laughing, but I felt like I was stuck in a parallel world. I ran through the options in my head. Take out a loan? They won't give me one. I already tried 6 months ago. Ask my friends. They don't have any money themselves. Sell something? I don't have anything to sell except an old laptop that isn't worth 1,000 rubles. At home, I sat down at the computer and started flipping through job ads. The vacancies were one worse than the other. Either they paid peanuts, or they required experience that I didn't have, or the schedule was such that I wouldn't be able to study anyway. Although, what difference does it make if I get expelled? It was a complete dead end. I scrolled and scrolled until my eyes started to close, and then I stumbled upon a strange ad. Needed, childcare assistant, live-in not required, pay. I even blinked a few times. The amount was such that in 1 month of work, I would be able to pay off my debt completely and still have money left over. It was too good to be true. The description was sparse. Responsible person needed to help with a baby, schedule negotiable, experience desirable but not required. Contact information. That's it. No details about the family, no conditions, nothing. I thought about it all night. What do I know about children? Nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing. No younger brothers or sisters. No nephews or nieces. At most, I've seen my neighbor pushing a stroller a couple of times. So now I'm going to babysit someone else's child? But there was no other option. None at all. In the morning, I dialed the number. It took a while for someone to answer, and when they did, I heard a man's voice. Tired, dry, businesslike. I introduced myself and said I was calling about the ad. He asked a couple of questions. My age, education, whether I had a criminal record, whether I was ready to start quickly. I answered on autopilot, my heart pounding like crazy. Then he gave me the address and said he would be waiting for me at 3 o'clock that afternoon. It all happened so fast that I didn't even have time to really prepare. I found the address, an upscale neighborhood that I usually avoided walking through. High-rise buildings with glass facades, concierges at the entrance, cars in the parking lots, each one worth as much as my entire 5 years of education. I went up to the right floor and rang the doorbell. The door was opened by a man in his 40s, maybe a little younger. He was tall, fit, wearing an expensive shirt, but he looked like he hadn't slept in a month. His eyes were dull with dark circles under them, and his face was gaunt. He nodded to me and let me in. The apartment was huge. Panoramic windows, minimalist design, everything expensive and stylish, but at the same time, somehow, empty, uncomfortable. Like a museum. The silence was oppressive. Only somewhere in the distance I could hear quiet snoring. He led me into the living room and gestured for me to sit down. He remained standing, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked at me appraisingly and remained silent for a long time. I began to feel nervous. Then he spoke. He said his name was Alexander, that he had a 3-month-old son, that the child needed constant care, and that he himself was physically unable to cope. His job took up a lot of time, so he needed someone reliable. The schedule was flexible, but sometimes he would have to stay late or work on weekends. The pay was as advertised, plus bonuses if everything went well. I listened and understood that he was not telling me something important. I could sense it. In his voice, in his eyes, some kind of heaviness, pain. But I didn't dare to ask. He asked if I had any experience. I answered honestly that I didn't, but that I was willing to learn, responsible, and seemed to be good with children. I lied about the children, of course, but what else could I do? Alexander nodded, paused for a moment. and then said that I would need to feed the child, monitor their sleep schedule, change diapers, and rock them if they cried. Occasionally, I would need to cook, clean, and wash children's clothes. In general, everything related to daily life and caring for an infant. Then he took me to the nursery. It was a small, bright room with a crib, a changing table, and toys. There were cute animal stickers on the walls, and a baby was sleeping in the crib, tiny in a blue onesie, with his fists near his face. I stood and looked at him, and something inside me tightened. So small, so defenseless. And his father was like this, exhausted, lost. Alexander quietly said that the child's mother had died in childbirth. Complications. No one expected it. She was healthy, everything was going well, and then in an instant, she was gone. I didn't know what to say. Condolences? Silly. I just nodded. He turned away and ran his hand over his face. We were silent for a while. Then he asked when I could start. I said tomorrow. He nodded again, gave me the time, instructions on how to use the intercom, and the keys. He said he would show me everything and explain everything for the first week, and then I would have to manage on my own. Payment would be at the end of each week. I left that apartment feeling strange. On the one hand, I felt relief. I had a job, I would have money, and I could continue my studies. On the other hand, I felt a strange anxiety. This house, this man, this whole story. I wasn't just going to be a nanny. I was going to be part of a family torn apart by grief. But I had no choice. The next day, I arrived at exactly 10 in the morning. Alexander opened the door, looking a little better. Apparently, he had slept well. He gave me a brief briefing. How to prepare the formula, how to hold the baby while feeding, how to change a diaper, what to do if the baby cries. He showed me everything quickly, businesslike, without unnecessary words. I tried to remember, wrote something down on my phone, but my head was a mess. The baby's name was Maxim. Max. He woke up while Alexander was instructing me and immediately started crying. Loudly, piercingly. Alexander picked him up and started rocking him, but the crying didn't stop. I could see his jaw tense as he tried to stay calm. Then he handed Max to me. I was almost scared. He was so small and fragile. What if I held him wrong? But I took him and held him close to me carefully. Max continued to cry, but not as hysterically. He looked at me with his big eyes and sniffed. I started rocking him and whispering something soothing, and he gradually quieted down. He buried his face in my chest and fell silent. Alexander looked at us with an incomprehensible expression on his face. Then he said he had to go to the office, that he would be back in the evening, that he had my number, and if anything urgent came up, I should call him. And he left. And I was left alone, with someone else's baby in my arms, in someone else's apartment. The first day was hell. Max slept, then woke up and cried. I rushed between the kitchen, where I was warming up formula, and the nursery, where he was screaming his head off. I tried to remember all the instructions, Googled on my phone, called my mother. I lied that I was helping a friend with his child, so she could give me some advice. By lunchtime, I was completely exhausted. But I managed. I fed him, changed his diaper, and put him to bed. I cleaned up the kitchen and washed the baby's clothes. By the evening, when Alexander returned, the apartment was in order, and Max was sleeping peacefully. Alexander went into the nursery, stood over the crib, then came out and nodded briefly to me. He said that everything was fine, that I was doing a good job. He handed me an envelope with the day's pay. I took it, thanked him, and left. That's how my new life began. The days passed, and gradually I got used to it. Max was no longer just a job for me. I got used to him, began to understand his cries, knew when he was hungry, when he just wanted attention, when he needed a diaper change. I learned how to rock him so that he would fall asleep in 5 minutes. I learned all his favorite toys and songs that calmed him down. Alexander would show up early in the morning and late at night. Sometimes he wouldn't show up at all. He would call and say he was stuck at work, that he would spend the night in a hotel near the office. I stayed with Max. I slept on the couch in the living room and got up at night when he woke up and cried. We hardly spoke to Alexander, only about practical matters, what needed to be bought, how Max was feeling, whether there were any problems. He was closed off, distant. He looked at his son with such longing that it made me uncomfortable. It was clear that he loved him, but looking at the child hurt him. Every time he picked Max up, I saw something break inside him. Once I went into the kitchen to get water for a bottle and saw him standing by the window. He was looking at the city at night and wasn't moving. He was just standing there. I wanted to leave quietly, but he turned around. His eyes were red, his face gaunt. He asked if it was hard for me to cope on my own. I replied that no, everything was fine, that Max was a good kid. Alexander nodded, paused, and then said that his wife wanted to name their son that. Maxim, that they chose the name together, argued, laughed, that she was happy when she found out she was pregnant, that they made plans for the future. I didn't know what to say. I just listened. He said that on the day she died, he was there. He was holding her hand. The doctors were rushing around, shouting something, taking her away, and he was standing in the hallway, not understanding what was happening. Then they told him that she hadn't survived, but the baby was alive. That he could see his son. Alexander fell silent and turned away. I saw his shoulders tense and his fists clench. Then he quietly added that he couldn't look at Max without feeling pain. That he saw his wife in him. That he felt like a monster because he couldn't love his own child the way he should. I felt so sorry for him at that moment. Such a successful, wealthy man who has everything, and yet he is so broken that he cannot even hug his son without suffering. I told him he wasn't a monster, that grief is normal, that it takes time. Clichés, of course, but I had to say something. He looked at me for a long time, nodded, and went to his room. I remained in the kitchen with the bottle in my hands and the feeling that I had just seen the real Alexander. Not the cold businessman who hired me, but a living person who was falling apart. After that conversation, something changed. Alexander began to stay home more often in the evenings. He would come into the kitchen when I was cooking dinner and ask how my day had gone. Sometimes he would sit next to me while I fed Max and watch us, silently, but without his former detachment. One evening, he asked me what I was studying. I told him about the university, my major, and why I needed this job in the first place. He listened attentively, nodded, and asked questions. Then he said that his company had an internship program for students, and that if I was interested, he could recommend me. I didn't know how to react. It was unexpected. I thanked him and said I would think about it. He smiled, the first time I had ever seen anything resembling a smile on his face. He said the offer would still be open. Gradually, we began to talk about more than just Max and work. Alexander talked about his business, his deals, his partners. I shared stories from university about my friends, about exams. It was strange, sitting in the kitchen with a billionaire and chatting like an old friend. But I liked it. I liked how he laughed, rarely but sincerely. How he grimaced at my coffee and said it was swill, and then made a proper espresso himself. How he fussed over Max when he thought I wasn't looking, kissing him on the top of his head, whispering something, hugging him close. He was thawing, slowly but surely. And I was happy about that. I was happy that there was less of that oppressive silence and pain in the house. And then I noticed that I liked more than just that. I like watching him when he reads in the evening, sitting in his chair. I like how he rolls up his shirt sleeves when he helps me clean up. I like his voice, low, calm. I like how he looks at me sometimes, with a long, thoughtful gaze. I tried to chase those thoughts away. I told myself that it was work, that he was my employer, that he was grieving, that I was just confusing gratitude with something else. But the thoughts wouldn't go away, especially at night when I lay on the sofa and heard his footsteps in the next room. Or in the morning when he came out of the shower and walked past me to his room, smelling of his shampoo and coffee. Or when our hands accidentally touched in the kitchen and something passed between us. Electricity, perhaps. I started catching his glances. He looked at me more often than before. Sometimes I turned around and saw him looking away. Sometimes our eyes met and there was an awkward, tense silence. But nothing happened. We both pretended that everything was normal. 2 months had passed since I started working. I had already saved up almost enough money for my studies. Another month, and I would be able to pay off my university debts and return to normal life. But the thought of leaving did not bring me joy, but rather a sense of emptiness. I had grown accustomed to this house, to Max, to to Alexander. And then one day, something happened that turned everything upside down. It was Friday. In the morning, Alexander warned me that he had an important meeting, that he would be back late, and that I might have to stay overnight. I agreed, not for the first time. The day passed as usual. Max behaved well. I managed to get everything done, made dinner, put the baby to bed. I waited for Alexander. He came back around midnight. I was sitting in the kitchen with a book when I heard the door open. I went out into the hallway. Alexander was standing leaning against the wall, his tie undone, his jacket casually slung over his arm. He looked exhausted. I asked if everything was okay. He nodded, walked into the kitchen, and plopped down on a chair. He asked for coffee. I put the coffee pot on the stove and got out the cups. He was silent, staring out the window. Then he said that the meeting had gone badly, that an important deal had fallen through, that his partners had let him down, that he was tired of it all, the business, the responsibility, the loneliness. He said the last word quietly, almost to himself, but I heard it. I poured the coffee and placed the cup in front of him. I sat down opposite him. I said I understood, that sometimes you just want to stop and not think about anything. Alexander looked at me, long and intently. Then he asked if I had any wine. I was surprised, but found a bottle of red in the bar. I opened it and poured us both a glass. We drank in silence. Then we had another glass. We talked about abstract things, movies, books, travel. Alexander talked about places he had been with his wife, about their plans that never came to fruition. His voice grew quieter and sadder. I didn't know how to comfort him. I just listened, nodded, and occasionally poured more wine. Then he suddenly asked why I was here, why I stayed longer than necessary, why I helped him more than my duties required, why I put up with him at all, closed, sullen, broken. I was taken aback. I didn't know what to say. I said the first thing that came to mind, that it wasn't hard for me, that I was used to it, that I liked Max. He smiled sadly. He said I was a bad liar, that he could see how I looked at him, that he didn't understand what was going on, but he could feel it. My heart sank. I froze. I didn't know whether to admit it or deny it. I remained silent. Alexander stood up and came closer. He stopped next to me. I raised my head and looked at him. He looked back at me, and there was so much in his eyes: fatigue, pain, loneliness, and something else. Something that made me forget to breathe. He leaned down and kissed me, slowly, carefully, as if he was afraid I would push him away. But I didn't push him away. I kissed him back. My world turned upside down. We moved to the living room, to the sofa. We kissed for a long time, eagerly, as if we both wanted to drown everything in it. His grief, my confusion, our loneliness. Our hands found each other, pressed against each other, caressed each other. Then everything blurred together. I don't remember how we ended up in his bedroom. I only remember how he whispered my name, how he touched me, how he looked at me. I remember that it was scary and exciting at the same time. I remember that on that night, we both seemed to have shed all our masks, all our roles. We were just two people who were lonely and who found each other. In the morning, I woke up alone. The bed next to me was empty, rumpled. I lay there and stared at the ceiling, trying to understand what had happened. What would happen now? How to look him in the eye. I got up, got dressed, and left the bedroom. The apartment was quiet. Alexander was nowhere to be found. In the kitchen, I saw a note. Gone on business. We'll be back late. Keys are on the table. That was it. No explanations, no apologies, no questions. As if nothing had happened. I spent the day in a daze. I took care of Max on autopilot, thinking only about one thing, that night. What it meant. Whether it meant anything at all. Maybe for him it was just a release, a weakness, a momentary madness. But for me it was important, very important. Alexander came back late when I was about to leave. He came in, nodded at me, asked how Max was. I replied that everything was fine. We stood and looked at each other. We were silent. Then he thanked me for my work and went to his room. I went home. The next day, it happened again, and the day after that. We acted as if nothing had happened. Formal, polite, distant. I tried to catch his eye, but he avoided me. I tried to talk about something personal, but he changed the subject to work. The week passed in this tense silence. I didn't know what to do. Leave? Force him to talk? Keep pretending? My thoughts kept returning to that night. I replayed every moment, every touch, every glance. I tried to understand whether it was reality or a dream. And I realized that I was in trouble. Really in trouble. Because I fell in love. In this complex, closed-off, wounded person. In the way he cares for his son, despite the pain. In the way he laughs rarely, but sincerely. In the way he tries to be strong when everything is falling apart inside. But he didn't want me. Or couldn't want me. Or was afraid. I don't know. Another month passed. I had enough money to pay for my studies. I settled my debt with the university and was reinstated. Mission accomplished. I could leave. But I didn't leave. I continued to come every day to take care of Max, to cook, to clean. I made up excuses for myself. That I couldn't abandon the child. That I was used to it. That the money was extra. But the truth was different. I didn't want to leave because I didn't want to lose Alexander. Even like this, cold, distant, avoiding me. At least like this. At least I could see him. Alexander seemed to understand this. Sometimes I caught his gaze and saw guilt in his eyes. Or regret. Or something else I couldn't quite recognize. One evening, he stayed late at work. I waited for him, wanting to finally talk. I gathered my courage. He came around 11, tired and exhausted. I said we needed to talk. He nodded and went into the kitchen. We sat across from each other, just like that night. I asked him directly, what happened between us? Why is he avoiding me? Why is he pretending that nothing happened? Alexander was silent for a long time. Then he said that he shouldn't have done it. That it was a mistake. That he wasn't in a position to start a relationship. That he felt guilty towards his wife's memory. That I was young, with my whole life ahead of me, while he was a broken man with baggage from the past and a child to care for. I listened and felt everything inside me tighten. He was pushing me away, consciously, deliberately, building a wall between us. I said that I didn't care, that I wasn't asking him to forget his wife or betray her memory, that I just wanted to be there for him, that that night meant more to me than he thought. Alexander looked at me and I saw pain in his eyes, real deep pain. He said quietly that he couldn't, that he was afraid, that if he allowed himself to love someone again and lost them, he wouldn't survive. He got up and left the kitchen. The conversation was over. I sat there for a long time. I understood that he was right, that he had reasons to be afraid, to close himself off, to push people away. But that didn't make it any easier for me. The next day I made a decision. To leave. To really leave. Because I couldn't stay and watch him suffer pushing me away. Because I was suffering myself. I told Alexander that I was leaving in a week. That school had started, that I needed more time for university, that I couldn't do both. He took it calmly. Too calmly. He nodded, said he understood, that he would find a replacement. The last week dragged on painfully. I said goodbye to Max in my mind every day. I kissed him on the top of his head when I put him to bed. I memorized his laughter, his little hands, his smell. Alexander was cold. He hardly ever came home. He avoided me until the very last moment. On the last day, I came early in the morning. I cleaned up for the last time, washed Max's clothes, and prepared food for several days ahead. I wrote a list of instructions for the new nanny. I laid everything out and put it in its place. Max was asleep. I sat next to his crib and looked at him. Such a calm, beautiful baby. He'll grow up and won't remember me, but I'll remember him forever. Alexander was supposed to come in the evening to pay me. I waited, gathered my things, and sat in the living room. He arrived at 6 o'clock sharp. He silently handed me an envelope with money. I took it and thanked him. We stood facing each other in the hallway. I had already turned to leave when he suddenly said, "Wait." I turned around. He was looking at me and his face was different. Not cold, not closed off. Alive. He said, "We haven't talked." About that night. I froze. My heart pounded. Alexander continued, saying that he had tried to forget, to erase it, to pretend that nothing had happened. But he couldn't. That he thought about it constantly. That he thought about me. He took a step closer. He said he was afraid. Afraid of losing again, of being alone again, of going through that pain again. But he was even more afraid of losing me without even trying. His voice trembled. I could see how hard it was for him to say this, how he was struggling with himself. He said, "That night was important to me too. Very important. You brought me back to life. You made me feel again." I didn't know what to say. I stood there looking at him, afraid to move, afraid to spoil the moment. Alexander asked quietly, "If I ask you to stay, not as a caregiver, as a friend, will you stay?" I didn't hesitate. I nodded. I said yes. He exhaled as if he had been holding his breath the whole time. He stepped toward me and hugged me, tightly, desperately. I hugged him back, burying my face in his shoulder. We stood there for a long time, just holding each other. Then he pulled away and looked me in the eyes. He said, "I can't promise it will be easy. I don't know what it's like to start over, but I want to try." "With you," I smiled. I said I wanted to too. He kissed me, gently, tenderly, not at all like that night. It was a different kiss. A promise. A beginning. We went back to the living room and sat down next to each other on the sofa. We talked for a long time and about how we felt, what we feared, what we wanted. For the first time, we truly opened up to each other. Alexander said that he had fallen in love with me gradually, without even noticing it. That he had seen how I cared for Max, how I tried to make the house cozy, how I tried to help him. That he was grateful to me for not giving up, for not leaving earlier, for giving him time to figure himself out. I told him that I had loved him for a long time. That night was not an accident for me. That I was ready to wait, to take it slowly, as he needed. He took my hand and intertwined his fingers with mine. He said, "Then stay. Forever." I stayed. The first few weeks were strange. We were getting used to our new reality. I moved into his room, but we took our time. We learned to be together, not as employer and caregiver, but as two people starting something important. Alexander changed before my eyes. He became softer, more open. He smiled more often. He played with Max and spent more time with him. It was as if the wall he had built between himself and the world after his wife's death had finally come crashing down. The three of us went for walks, him, me, and Max in his stroller. We cooked dinner together. We watched movies in the evenings when the baby fell asleep. We discussed plans for the future. I talked about my studies, he talked about his work. We lived. Max grew up, and I rejoiced at each of his new achievements. His first smile, his first laugh, his first conscious glance. Alexander did too. We were happy. Just happy. Of course, not everything was perfect. Sometimes Alexander would shut down when memories of his wife overwhelmed him. I didn't take offense or demand explanations. I was just there when he was ready to talk and gave him space when he needed to be alone. Sometimes I was afraid that it was temporary, that one day he would wake up and realize he had made a mistake. But Alexander dispelled those fears every time. He said he loved me, that he couldn't imagine life without me, that I was his second chance at happiness. 6 months passed. My studies were going well, and I managed to combine them with helping Alexander around the house and taking care of Max. However, we did end up getting a nanny, a young woman who came for a few hours a day when we were both busy. One evening, Alexander said he wanted to show me something. He took me to his room, opened a drawer, and took out a box. Inside was a wedding ring, simple and elegant. He said, "This was my wife's ring. I can't give it away or throw it away, but I bought a new one. For you. If you're ready." He took out another box. He opened it. Inside was another ring, similar but not the same. I stared at him, unable to believe it. He got down on one knee right there in the bedroom and asked, "Will you be my husband?" I cried. I nodded. I whispered, "Yes." He put the ring on my finger, stood up, and hugged me. We stood there for a long time and I could feel him trembling. I asked if everything was okay. He nodded and said he was just happy, that he didn't think he could be happy again after everything that had happened. The wedding was quiet without any fuss. Only our closest friends and family were there, my parents, his friends, colleagues. Max was with us, wearing a little suit, sleeping peacefully in my mother's arms during the ceremony. When we were declared husband and wife and kissed, I realized that I had come a long way from being a desperate student looking for a job to pay for my studies to a man who had found his family, his home, his love. Alexander had changed too. From a closed-off man immersed in grief, he had become a loving father and husband. He still remembered his wife, still loved her in his own way, but he had learned to move on. He had learned to be happy again.